welcome To the Contrary. I'm Bonnie Bay. This week, our woman thought leader is Danielle Belton, editor-in-chief at The Root and a former regular To the Contrary panelist. Of course, not in that order. Anyway, Danielle, very good to see you. How are you?
I am excellent. It's so good to see you.
And you are now living up in New York City. We saw you regularly when you were down here and commuting, I think, to St. Louis or something, right?
No, my hometown is St. Louis. I would go home twice a year to see my family.
Gotcha. Okay. So first, let's talk about you, and then let's talk about The Root and COVID, and some other things, of course. But about you, tell us about your career history and what exactly is the Black Snob and how did it end up where you are now?
Oh, sure. So originally I was a newspaper reporter and I worked for several small town papers, including the Midland Reporter Telegram and the Bakersfield Californian. And I was the first blogger at the Bakersfield Californian in 2004. And so that put like an idea in my head that, if I ever wanted to start my own thing, I could probably do it. And so in 2007, that's exactly what I did. I started my own blog called The Black Snob, and it was a pop culture and politics blog. It was really funny. And it blew up really fast because I started it in late 2007. And by 2008, I wrote about when then Senator Obama, who would become President Obama, had just won Iowa, and the blog just took off from there. And every job I've gotten since that blog has been because of that blog. I worked in television for a little while where I was head writer for a late night talk show called Don't Sleep. I was hosted by TJ Holmes. I did a lot of satirical writing as well. And, I've kind of like bounced around in the world of media. Now I'm at The Root. I love it. I've been with The Root since 2015. And I was promoted to lead The Root in 2016. And in the short time that I was there, I managed to grow the site by over 300%. And a lot of it was based on the same ideals that I had from the Black Snob on how to approach news and how to reach people.
Well, tell me the whole idea of the Black Snob. I mean, I know you're a comedian, but at first blush, it doesn't sound very, it's not a compliment, right?
Of course. So the name was a bit of a joke. When I was in college, most people didn't know my background or where I was from. And so I remember I was in a car once. My friends had cars. I did not have a car when I was in college. And I was always forgetting to lock the car door. Like every time I would forget to lock the car door. And then my friends would yell at me. They'd be really angry, like someone could steal the car, Danielle. Like, how could you be so careless? And one day they were yelling at me. And finally I yelled back, "Oh my God, only reason why I don't know to lock your car doors is I've never ridden in a car that didn't have automatic locks." And like, you can't say stuff like that to people because their response was like, "Oh my God, like, who do you think you are, you snob?" And so, so that's where the name came from. Like, I just thought it was really funny. What was interesting was actual snobs like just loved the name, like loved it. So they were like reclaiming the word snob. They would buy all my Black Snob merch and would proudly say that they were a snob. It was hilarious. It was a really, really fun time.
And you did not get accused by whatever the opposite of those people are by not being authentically Black? In other words, how can you be a rich Black person and an authentic Black person at the same time?
Well, the reality is no matter how much money you have, you can't really escape the Black experience. So it's still a Black experience, whether you come from a comfortable background or you don't. So you still experience a lot of the same things. It's just slightly different.
Now, how important has The Root become to Black culture? Do you find stories that you do mimicked by culture or the other way around? In other words, do you find yourself in the lead sometimes? Creating trends as opposed to reporting on them?
I find that a lot of the media criticism and cultural criticism that we do at The Root is replicated by a lot of the mainstream press and our competitors. We've managed to be a leader in our space. We do everything from opinion writing to investigative reporting to just the day-to-day of what's going on in the world. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Like, we have a really kind of like we're really big fighters at the root. If we believe in something, we say it with our chest. We're bold and vibrant and bright. And I have like the most amazingly talented staff. They're so funny and so smart, and they kill it every day.
That's terrific. Now let's switch for a little bit anyway to African Americans and people of color and the COVID-19 virus. Of course, people of color have been more negatively affected by the virus than have white people. And there was a study that came out recently that showed that there's a deadlier toll on Black lives, and another survey shows that African Americans are 60% of deaths. Why?
Well, the reality is that there are all these historic inequities that have existed between Black people and white people in American society. And when you have these inequities, you're just going to get hit harder by anything that's detrimental to the country. So if unemployment is bad across the board, for Black people, it's often double. If there's issues with where Americans, don't know geography or struggle with English, like there's huge problems of discrepancies with education gaps between Black and white students in our school systems. So it's not shocking when you actually think about it, when you consider that Black people often have less access to healthcare. When they do have access to healthcare, they deal with often racism from the doctors who we've written so many stories at the root about Black people who couldn't get tested for COVID-19, no matter what they did, and then ended up succumbing and dying from the disease, and their family, are so upset and are really pushing for why is it that when we go to the hospital and then we're sick, we're not listened to? The fact that people have to essentially beg and fight and plead to get testing, that's a huge problem as well. And then the fact that testing just isn't widespread, we have certain constraints there. And then there's just the fact that, being able to afford healthcare, having that access to healthcare, being able to kind of take advantage of the system in that way. We haven't had that kind of access historically. And so there's lots of disparities. And so that's really where it comes from. Now, there is a reality that a lot of Black people, because of their experience with the medical community, are a little bit hesitant at times to seek medical attention. Yes, because of things like the Tuskegee experiment, things about forced sterilization of Black women. So people are suspicious for a reason of the medical community. When you think of stories like Henrietta Lacks, where her cells were basically harvested and she and her family didn't benefit from it at all. So there's a healthy fear there. And then when you compound it with the fact that Black women, when they're in childbirth, doctors often don't listen to them when they say they're having complications or pains. And there's a higher percentage of Black women who actually die in childbirth. The mortality rate is extremely high for a westernized country. So, to me, it's really rooted in systemic inequality in this country.
And that let's talk about that a little bit. One of my favorite relatively new on camera comedian is Kenya Barris, and Black AF on Netflix is hysterical. And of course, he always blames everything in the world on slavery. So, but slavery, at least in name, ended in 1863. With the Emancipation Proclamation. Of course, there was Jim Crow and all that stuff for another 100 years which kept Black people from being educated, from being able to gain control of their worth in society, get jobs that paid them equally, blah, 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 blah. Now, 155 years later, we've had a Black president. We have, not just as it was in the 60s, Black football, basketball, you name it, pro sports, tennis, athletes, but powerful Black politicians, although there's only still one in the Senate, one person, one African American anyway.
Well, there's two. There's Kamala Harris and Cory Booker.
Sorry. Yes, of course. I was thinking of the South Carolinian. But anyway, but things generally, and in, if I may say this as a stupid white person, it's almost like cooler to be black now than it is to be white in society. So, to the people who say, okay, yes, yes, we still have a ways to go, but it's
Hmm.
certainly much better than it was
Yeah.
pre-Obama, et cetera, et cetera. How much longer do you think these disparities are going to continue?
As long as there is systemic racism in the society, these disparities will continue because the system is working exactly the way it was intended to work for. It's intended to work for wealthy white people. It's not meant to work for the vast majority of Americans. And so it's like, yeah, like people have, like, historically in America, Americans, especially white Americans, have always loved black culture. They love black music. They love hip hop. They love jazz. They love rock and roll, which, was founded by like pioneers like Chuck Berry and Big Mama Thornton. But they don't actually like black people. Like, no one actually wants to be black. They want to be able to be cool and be cool adjacent to the culture that black people create. But when it comes to like, okay, I'm being brutalized by the police. I can't vote in the same way other people are able to vote. I don't have the same access to healthcare, education. It's like, whoa, slavery was a long time ago. Like, why are we still talking about this? It wasn't like, slavery ends and like they gave you education and they paid you back for your lost wages and then gave you therapists to deal with the psychological trauma of being chattel. Like, you were just thrust out in the world and told to figure it out. And so you're at such a statistical disadvantage, because you had to start from zero. And every generation has had to start from zero in some way, shape, or form, whether it was because of Jim Crow and segregation, whether it's because of redlining, which happened all throughout the North, in northern cities where it was harder to get housing for African Americans and for other people, to just police brutality. Like, I always say that so much of my life and my parents' life was about avoiding the trap. And the trap is the one that's set for black people because of racism, because the system isn't designed for you to actually fail it. Because that's how it's supposed to work for black people. You're supposed to stay poor. You're supposed to stay subjugated. You're supposed to work low wage jobs and not have the same access to the same things other Americans have. So the system is working as it was designed. And so
But do
you
you
have
really
to
think?
make,
Do you really, when you say that? I mean, I can't speak for anybody
mhm.
else except maybe my husband, who I know, extremely well. But I don't have those expectations of people, of not just African Americans, but any people of color.
Well, it's not an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. So that's why you can have a black president, but you still have police brutality and oppression. Like, it wasn't like that under Obama that suddenly there weren't any more instances of police brutality. Like, there were plenty. Mike Brown happened
Right.
while Obama was in White House. Trayvon Martin happened. So many people have had to deal with state-sponsored violence from the police and who are African American. So it's like just having like a high-profile person or having a celebrity obtain wealth doesn't offset the way the system has been set up to basically push black people into segregated spaces, into mass incarceration, into systems that are designed to fail them over and over and over again.
I mean, like, every time you have a great point there, and think of, for example, the jogger who was just murdered in Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
and you think that sounds like something that could have happened in Georgia in the 1960s, but shouldn't even be on anybody's mind
Mm-hmm.
anymore. It's like something out. It's like something out of history, and yet it happened today. Do you think we'll ever get to a point in America where those kinds of things aren't happening? Or I don't know if they happen to white people, but where there isn't a disparity between the percentage of African Americans, for example, killed by
Mm-hmm.
whites versus the other way around.
I feel like we have to work at it, and it can't just be black people by themselves, advocating for change. It has to be Black and white people working together to make the conscious decision that we want to change how our society works, that we want our society to be more equitable and fair, that we want a level playing field for everyone in order to see, how far of what they can achieve. That's going to take a lot of work. We're not there yet. I don't know if we'll make it there in my lifetime. God, I hope so. Like, I'm 42. I would like to believe that by the time I'm my father's age, he's 78, that I would see a better and brighter and more equitable world. But I mean, that's what we're all working on. Like, at the root, we really push hard to educate people about the world around them and inform them about the world around them so they can make the decisions they need to make in their life. So it's like, it's going to take a full court press. It's going to take everyone. It's going to take you, me, literally everybody to constantly work at it as a nation.
How much do you think President Obama's presidency, and of course Michelle Obama, one of the most beloved women in the world, pushed it forward, and how far has Donald Trump pushed it back?
What's interesting, like, when the Obamas were in office, like, they still faced like a lot of hate and racism from people who were very upset that the United States had elected its first African-American president, And so there was all this take our country back. Like, that was the big thing, that we're going to take our country back from, these liberals, from these African-Americans who have taken over the White House. And in some respects, the Trump presidency is a response to the Obama White House. What's sad to me is this is like a really weird response, because, like, say what you will about Obama, it was a scandal-free presidency. He led with poise and grace, and he was a complete diplomat, and he never embarrassed us on the national stage. So you can argue about, well, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, like, that could have been better. Like, I have all those same criticisms too. But when it came down to it, he was a reliable, stable, steady president, and the country grew under him. And so to watch basically racism corrupt the system and cause our current president to want to dismantle everything Obama did, whether it was good or not. It's like, oh, Obama did it, it's bad, get rid of it. It doesn't matter if it actually helps people or made the society better. Like, the fact that, we're dismantling the Affordable Care Act, we're like he's trying to snuff it out. Or the fact that
But that was, remember, Republicans who controlled both chambers back then were trying to do that even before he left office. I mean, that's been
exactly
the agenda since, and that affects, while it may affect African Americans disproportionately, it actually affects more white people, just because white people are 2/3 of the country or something like that, and 67%, and then African Americans are about 15-20%. So they're,
I think we're actually like 13% of the population.
Okay, 13%.
Yeah, I think it's lower than that. Yeah,
it's something I read recently. Well, anyway, beyond the numbers, yes, but still, there are more in actual numbers. There are more white people on Obamacare getting knocked off than people of color, because there are more of them.
Yes, exactly. And so that's, like, the fact that, like, I remember when Trump was first elected, and there were all these people who were like shocked, who had voted for Trump, that he actually went after the Affordable Care Act. And it's like, that's what he said he was going to do. And they were like, well, yeah, I just thought it was just all talk on the campaign trail. I didn't know he was going to actually try to dismantle everything that Obama created, whether it was good or not. And that's what was wild to me, that all these people voted for Trump based on their idea of who they thought Trump was, as opposed to the words that actually came out of his mouth and the things that he said. That was just shocking to me, because he made it very clear he was going to dismantle Obamacare, that he was going to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. He made it very clear that he was going to go after immigration. And so, like, the fact that people are shocked, they continue to still be surprised when racist policies come out of this White House. And it's like, he told you he was going to do this, And so you can't be surprised. Like, you definitely should have fought against it. You should have pushed back more. I wouldn't have voted for the man. I didn't vote for the man. So it's it's been an interesting, it's been an interesting first term for this president, and I'm curious to see how this all, turns out in the fall.
You mentioned Kamala Harris. Let's talk about her as a potential vice presidential candidate at this point. I've heard arguments between pundits, white and black pundits. What if she is chosen by Biden? What could she get the black community out for him any more than African Americans will turn out for him because he was vice president under Obama?
I think Kamala could really add a lot to Biden's campaign. I personally prefer Stacey Abrams, but I understand that Kamala's the bigger name.
And what about
more
Val
people
Demings
know who she
of Florida?
Oh, Val is great, but yeah, I have, like people know Kamala.
Well, yeah,
she ran for president. She's high profile.
She did, but she didn't. Donna Edwards, who's a regular panelist on the show, former congresswoman from Maryland and a friend, she and other African American experts who, I mean, she's out there in the, on the hustings all the time, campaigning for Democrats, and I've heard tell that Kamala Harris is not going to pull African Americans because she was a prosecutor in California, and she sent a lot of black people to prison.
Yeah, that is a real hurdle that she wasn't able to get over during the actual race when the Democratic primary was still in full swing. And so that is a problem when it comes to her. The fact that she has this record as a prosecutor that was really tough. She was a tough prosecutor. She's not necessarily super popular with black people in California. That's why a lot of my friends who are from California who tell me about how they feel about her tend to be much more ambivalent and less enthusiastic. But
that's why I asked, for example, about, you're going to the big name possibilities that who Biden is talking about, but both of whom have different kinds of flaws in terms of, the whole deal in the primaries is you go to the extremes of your party, and the Democrats, it's the left wing. And then after the primaries in the general election, you try to go towards the middle, and Stacey Abrams is not necessarily the greatest candidate when it comes to trying to get back to the middles. But somebody like a Val Demings, or not African American, but Latina, Governor Lujan Grisham of New Mexico, for example, they're less talked about, but they don't have the flaws that the two front runners for this job, if you will, have. And Val Demings is about as authentic as you can get. We interviewed her a few weeks ago, and I mean, she was a police chief, but she took care of African Americans in Orlando and blah, 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 blah. So why not a lesser known name like that?
I would be all for it if Biden took a risk in that particular capacity, because to me, it's not really a risk. Like the reality is African Americans are tired of this president. We didn't vote for him en masse. We did not. Like black women, it was something like, what was it, like 96% of black?
90% of African Americans.
Over 90%. Yeah, right. Black women, voted for Hillary. So it's like, we can't stand another 4 years of this. Like, I don't know if we as a people could take any more of these terrible policies and just the neglect. Like, he's actually a really, not very present president. He barely works. When he does, it's just really about getting camera time and because he thinks he's still filming his reality show. I don't know what's happening.
Well, or quite frankly, spending a lot of time watching people on
watching
television.
The shows, and then rage tweeting about Cuomo and who he sees on television and what people are saying about him. And so black people are pretty motivated to vote for whomever is not Trump. So all Biden has to do is not screw this up. Like, he just needs to pick someone who is smart and won't fall down flat on their face when they walk out and start talking. Like, he just needs a dynamic, kind of fun person who's, really, really sharp, preferably a woman, preferably African American, and he'll be fine. Like,
and your favorite is Harris?
No, my favorite is actually Abrams. Kamala, I think, is probably who he's going to ultimately pick.
Really? Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep watching and we will hold you to that prognostication and have you back in here if you were wrong or if you were right. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Best of luck with the root. Keep doing the great job you're doing. And thank you for watching. Please join us next time. Please visit our PBS website, tothecontrary.org. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.